Hello and welcome to Excelino's three-part series on DevSecOps. Really appreciate you joining. This is a three-part series where we'll be talking about the what, the why, and the how when it comes to DevSecOps. This is part one where we're going to talk about what, and by that it is what is DevSecOps. So a lot of great information that we're going to cover here today. Before we jump in, I'd like to talk a little bit about myself. I'm Josh Minthorn, director here at Excelino, and we're a professional services company where we really work with customers on their DevSecOps journey, no matter where they're at, whether they're just now starting or whether they are working through to define that journey, or maybe they're somewhere in the middle. We can help advise, and we also help implement and build out a DevSecOps strategy. So with that being said, what are we going to cover here today? So again, we're going to be covering what is DevSecOps, and we're really going to focus on three distinct areas. So one, what is DevSecOps? And then we're going to talk about DevOps versus DevSecOps, what's different, what's the same, and then we'll get into some DevSecOps fundamentals. So thinking about that, really the question is what is DevSecOps? Now, before I dive into that, what I want to do is take a step back and think about, DevOps, DevSecOps, and why is it important? And really what it is that, in today's modern landscape, with a lot of rapidly changing priorities, rising expectations from customers, new market opportunities, what's happened is that IT leaders must now discover new ways to really streamline the delivery of applications and systems that are providing key business value. And with that, that really starts to have this become a challenge is the pace of change in which the market has reached is where, we think of things in terms of pace, right? We think about velocity and really rapid response times. And so things have to be moving very quickly and also responding very, very quickly. And that's really this new paradigm, and it's imperative that organizations are able to adapt and change and meet those market demands and respond. And so what that really means is that organizations, to continue to remain competitive, really they need to begin to reduce cycle time. Now, we do have an article about this that you can find on our website that goes into that further, but in a nutshell, cycle time is the amount of time it takes to really go from an idea to get something to production, which is into somebody's hands, into a user's hands, and all of the things that happen during that period of time. And that's not just an initial release, but also, again, over and over again, because applications live and breathe until they become stable, and then eventually they get retired. But right on the heels of that, a lot of times is new applications. So with a combination of rapidly changing priorities, these rising expectations from customers, and these new market opportunities, coupled with this ever-changing technological landscape, IT leaders are now really trying to look, and they have to find ways to streamline again, the delivery of applications and systems. Now, the thing is, though, is that it's not just about streamlining delivery, right? There's more to it than just that. You can't just look at each step in the process and say, hey, how do we make this shorter? And the reason is that typically when that's done, usually corners get cut. And there's sacrifices that are made, and sometimes that builds up technical debt, or it creates at the time an unforeseeable risk, and that's one of the things that we want to avoid. And so, again, when we increase the pace of which organizations release features, because it directly impacts success, right? The faster things can be responded to, the faster that things can be released with a high quality. So when we think through that, right, the effort of trying to streamline delivery has placed a greater emphasis on automation. And therefore, with this rapid pace and increase in automation, where have we really seen an impact? Because honestly, development and operations teams have been looking at that, but we tend to see where there's a direct impact on security teams. And when our work, experience working with customers, is that the security teams tend to really try to struggle a little bit to keep up with the quick pace of development. And that means that all of a sudden now reviewing code for security vulnerabilities or other things before software is released tends to fall by the wayside, or there's a little bit of, if you will, horse trading when it goes to get to a release. And we'll get into this here in a little bit. But again, there is a major impact. So that's where DevSecOps comes into play, right? So we're going to be building off of DevOps, and you'll see this, right? We're talking about Dev, we're talking about Ops, but now we're introducing security. So when we think about that, what is DevSecOps? Well, in a nutshell, it's the combination of development, security, and operations, and it's a holistic approach to how software is built and run, and there is a focus on security throughout, as opposed to waiting until the end. And in doing so, now security becomes a shared responsibility throughout the IT lifecycle. And actually, it's really so important, it actually becomes a mindset that really needs to flow through all of the teams. And that's what really led to the term DevSecOps. And it's really and truly about building a security foundation into DevOps initiatives. So when we think about this, if we were to kind of think through this, right, as you can see here, what is DevSecOps? The purpose and intent of DevSecOps is to build on the mindset that everyone is responsible for security, with the goal of safely distributing security decisions at speed and scale to those who hold the highest level of context without sacrificing the security required. Excuse me, the safety required. So what that means is, as you can see, security becomes a shared responsibility. It becomes a shared mindset. Everybody is thinking about it. Everybody is taking it into consideration. And we make sure that we're doing that sooner and throughout, so that we're not having to get to the end to start to think about security, which typically means to hit, let's say, release dates and other things. Security actually then starts to get sacrificed. And the reason is that we don't really normally see it, but it actually starts to create risk and technical debt, which then becomes very challenging to respond when there are incidents. And we'll talk about that as well. Now, what do we typically see when we think of just, let's say, DevOps? We've got planning, we do development, we've got testing, we do a demo, and that's that iterative, agile fashion, and we're trying to do automation. And usually there's a development team and a QA team, and maybe some other teams that are involved, but in general, those teams are really focusing on everything during the development lifecycle. And the thing is that then when security gets involved, it really kind of gets tacked on to the end. And now security has to do planning and scanning and testing and reporting, but that's usually done by a separate security team and sometimes a separate sort of QA team, if you will. They're not looking necessarily at specific features and testing for functionality, but it's more, again, a team that is really specifically looking at security, and it could be from different viewpoints. For instance, penetration testing, it could be down, let's say, at the OS level, or maybe at a platform level if you're, let's say, using cloud native technologies, things like that. Again, it's usually tacked on towards the end. And that's the thing, is that it's tacked on towards the end. And so then what happens is, if you look, we do all this development, security then happens at the very end, and then you deploy. Now that works to a degree, but we can do it better. And by better, it's not only about time, but also what's one of the things that you see here. We're doing all this development and planning and testing and demos and everything, and then security gets a hold of it. So anything that security finds, it may now have to come back into development before it gets deployed. And then it's this back and forth. And again, usually that's tacked on towards the end. Now, this is what that usually looks like. You've got kind of development, you've got operations, and then you've got security, application security, infrastructure security. Now, those two terms are broad on purpose because a lot of things are covered by those terms in terms of security. And so it's really, again, all-encompassing security. And so, again, with DevOps, what we would see is that development operations team come together. So you'd see the purple and that orangish color start to come together. But when we think of DevSecOps, what do we really want to get to? We really want to get everybody involved. That goes back to that shared responsibility, that shared mindset. If you think of DevOps, what was that? DevOps is about shifting left. It was about shifting operations to the left. Well, now with DevSecOps, we are going to shift security to the left. App security, every part of security, we're shifting that to the left because as DevOps proved, is when we shift things to the left and everybody's involved, things are smoother, there's better communication, there's better transparency. You start to become aware of things ahead of time. There's still some things around being reactive, but you can start to be proactive, and anything that is reactive, you've reduced the time that it is required to respond to something. And that's the whole goal. So we're going to take that mantra, if you will, and we're going to do that with security by shifting to the left. Now, the FTC, they did a study around, they were using DevSecOps, and this was actually from a few years ago, actually it was in 2015, and they really discussed adding security from the start. And they did a white paper around this in their findings and their experience implementing DevOps and the changes it made. It's a fantastic article. I highly advise going out and finding it. But something that really stuck out to me was this piece here that says, companies that consider security from the start assess their options and make reasonable choices based on the nature of their business and the sensitivity of the information involved. Threats to data may transform over time, but the fundamentals of sound security remain constant. Now, what's really important there is that this is a very distinct statement, but also a broad statement. And what I mean by that is that, right, assess the options and make reasonable choices based on the nature of the business and the sensitivity of the information involved. That's really important because, yes, there are some things with security that pretty much every company will do. But then there's things with security that certain companies are going to do that other companies may not need to do. So is there HIPAA compliance? Is there SOC compliance? FIPS? I mean, there's a whole bunch of them that may need to be done. So certain companies will have to do additional security measures, have to do additional things. And it's not a one size fits all. You've got to think about it. Let's start about thinking about security from the beginning, and let's think about what makes sense for us. And the other thing is, you're not going to be able to do everything up front. Start somewhere and slowly add to it. Because especially if security is not involved in the DevOps and the development lifecycle, well, you can't just do everything in now. What we do is start to take small pieces of security and start to weave those things in and get better and better and better and to make those changes. Now, when we think about DevOps versus DevSecOps, again, what's different? What's the same? Well, one thing that is the same is shifting left. Right? Shift left, that is a DevSecOps mantra. It's a DevOps mantra. Again, but the difference is that it encourages software engineers and everybody to move security from the right, like what we had in the diagram before, more towards the left, towards the beginning of our DevOps process. And that's how we get to DevSecOps. Right? So when we think of what does a DevSecOps environment look like? Well, security, is really an integral part of the development process from the outset. And really, when we think about the scales outside of just a team, is in an organization. And so an organization that uses DevSecOps, what they're really doing is they're taking the security subject matter experts, right, the architects and engineers and everyone, and they're involving them in the development process. So now you've got this now even greater comprehensive development team of dev and operations and QA and testing and security as well. And now what happens with those security subject matter experts is that they're really there to help ensure every component and every configuration item really in the stack, right? Every piece of what makes up an application is, let's say, patched and configured securely, it's documented. And why? That is so that it's about sharing knowledge, it's about being involved, it's about, again, don't tack it to the end in terms of security, but also it's about being able to eventually respond and also reduce that cycle time that I mentioned before without making sacrifices. Now, again, what's this going to do? Well, one of the things it's going to do is that now you've got security moving to the left. So you're going to, again, identify security risks and exposures much earlier. And also, because you're finding those things earlier and they're being communicated to development teams and things earlier, or whoever else needs to make changes, because again, it could be at the infrastructure or an OS level, those things can now be addressed immediately. And you'll see why that's important here in a little bit. And now everybody, not only the development team, but everybody is thinking about building a product efficiently, but also including security as they build it. Now, again, what do we normally see? Typically, when we think of our process, if we think of it in a way as throughput, you've got development, you've got testing, you've got operations. That's DevOps. And then you end up getting to security. And then operations comes back around because that's kind of that deploy and monitor, things like that. But if you notice here, as we go from development, testing, operations, we hit security, and now all of a sudden, you notice that last arrow is smaller, and that's because not intentional by any means. Security is, everybody's got the right idea, right? Everybody's trying to do the right thing, just from different viewpoints. So security, right? They inadvertently become a bottleneck because they're slowing down that release process. Things have to get through security first. So what we want to do is we want to change that. Again, we want to break down those silos. We want to break down those bottlenecks, which you can see here, right? We've got a bottleneck. So we want to move activities to the left. So really what we're doing with DevSecOps is we're going to enable a new motto, and that is software safer sooner. And we're by bringing in and also automating the delivery of that secure software when we don't want to slow down the development lifecycle. So we're going to integrate our application and infrastructure security right into our Agile and DevOps processes. Sometimes that means introducing potentially new tools and platforms. Other times it may be using something that you already have. A lot of platforms have started to include a lot of those features because of the importance of security when it comes to this. And then again, it addresses security issues as they emerge because they're easier and faster and less expensive to address. And so what does that start to look like? Well, now we've gotten rid of our bottleneck, and now we've got development, we've got testing, we've got operations, we've got security, all working together, and now we have greater throughput. And again, what does that lead to? Greater throughput is two things. One, more things can get done, yes. However, a couple other things. We've reduced our cycle time. We're getting out the door faster. And also the quality and security of things that are being released goes up. We're not having to sacrifice some security to make sure we hit a release deadline or anything. So we're not sacrificing there. So security now is up. That means the quality is up. And with that, that means you can respond to changes faster, right? Again, what a customer demands, was there a potential breach? Was it that you got to add in something that's new to address the market? Whatever it may be, now you're able to confidently do that. The other thing too is that now security can really be done at scale. Because again, we've broken down some of these silos and we're doing security throughout the development process, application security, infrastructure security. We're doing it all together. What does that mean? Again, security at scale. We're actually, from a security standpoint, able to actually do more than we were doing before. Now, one of the big things too is with DevSecOps, as I'm sure you see, is it means that what we're going to do is we're really now going to start to invite the security teams and other security partners at the beginning, if we can, of our our DevOps initiatives. And we want to build information security and set a plan for security automation. Now, we do have customers where they're already on this journey. You may already be on that journey, and that's okay. There's no bad time. You're never too late to start to involve security. And I can tell you this, working with companies and over the years, when I was doing consulting, security really appreciates actually being brought into the fold. And they want to learn more. They want to understand more. They're really and truly there to help and to do things. But they're coming from the forefront of, hey, we've got to make sure things are secure. So we've actually seen an improvement in how teams work together, how they communicate, and an overall positive impact on culture at companies when DevSecOps is really being done. It really strengthens the teams. Not only that, but what it also starts to do is it broadens, if you will, the horizons of ops teams and developers too, because as you'll see here, they're getting exposed to the security as opposed to, again, just kind of throwing it over the wall, having to get a report back, and then having to potentially go and fix issues. And so, the other thing too, when we think of DevSecOps, is that it's really also about security teams really sharing with everyone and providing that visibility, that feedback and insights onto, known issues, known threats, and everything there, which means, that could be new tools and reporting. It could be new security training for developers, anything there. It's really about growing the team. So when we think through that, okay, kind of coming up, I also want to point out why this is really, really important. So there's a study done by NIST, which talks about the cost of software bugs, roughly almost $60 billion annually, and that's actually a slightly older report, so it's gone up. And then you look at the average cost of a software developer, and if you look through here, the different stages of coding, let's say integration, system, and production. Really, where do you find not necessarily an environment, where do you find issues? And what's important here is that these are not only application defects, but also security defects and everything. The question is, well, the later on that I find it, what's the impact there? As you can see, not only do the number of hours go up, but with that, there's a cost that goes up. So the sooner we can find things, it's actually less expensive to address it. So again, if you just look at $720, let's say in the coding stage versus in the production stage, almost $4,000. And just the difference between, if you look at system and production, the time almost doubles, and the cost goes up right along with that. So the other thing too here to think about is the longer we wait, not only is it more expensive, but what's the risk? What's the cost of it getting all the way out into production? Now, it's impossible to catch everything, but we want to be better at trying to catch as much as we can. And really, what does this mean? We go from sequential DevOps, or kind of one stage after another, and we really want to go to concurrent DevOps. That is one of the things with DevSecOps. So what we've seen is that customers tend to get 200% faster DevOps lifecycle. There's greater visibility, and therefore it's greater efficiency, and then there's some governance in there as well, because again, it's about sharing information. And some of the other things we talked about, right? You get embedded security. It's measured and known. Everybody's empowered to act. You get greater collaboration, and everybody's working together. Now, as we get into this final piece, what are some of the fundamentals? Now, before I go into this, there are a lot of things with DevSecOps. That is why we have this as a three-part series, and this is the what. Next time will be the why, and then the how, where we'll dig further into these. But what's really, really important is there are some fundamentals to really start to think about, and really to help guide. And then you got to, right, they're building off of these. And if you already have a DevOps or a DevSecOps strategy, that's awesome. I'm very happy that that's been started. It's really important. I like to say, hey, do you fall in line with these? Where is yours the same? Where is yours different? Maybe you tried some of these things and it didn't work, or maybe there's some things in here you haven't quite tried yet. So when we think about this, we've got to think about what takes place at different stages. So if you're familiar and you've been looking at DevOps for a while, this graphic should look very familiar, which is really the SDLC when we think of from a DevOps and Agile perspective, right? We plan, we code, we build, we test, we release, deploy, operate, monitor, and we come back and we keep going. And then we've got the dev side and the ops side. But we now want to build security into this. So what does that look like? Now, remember, one of the things we said was we're going to shift security left. It becomes a holistic viewpoint. It's top of mind for everybody. So what do we do? Now, this is not an exhaustive list, and there's more that could absolutely be added to this and things that are very specific to different customers. But for instance, in the code stage, we have code reviews. Now, a lot of customers have code reviews. They say, wait a minute, we already do code reviews. Yes, that's true, but are you doing it from a security standpoint? What's being done, again, looking at it, is that a secure library? Hey, was that plain text password? Was there something else that was done? Is it, let's say it's you're creating a microservice and have an API. Well, did it get exposed over HTTP as opposed to HTTPS? All those sorts of things. Then you get into things like SAST scanning, and you get into software composition analysis. You get into DAST and penetration testing, right? And you start to look at as you go through this, right? What's your compliance? And are you validated there, right? You're going through and scanning, and then you're saying, hey, are we meeting compliance standards? And we've got to log and audit when we deploy. There's threat intelligence. There's patching infrastructure, can also be software and libraries. And there's security monitoring as things are running. And then, right, what are our threat model policies? So as you can see now, through every piece of this on the dev side, on the ops side, there are different pieces of security that get folded in. And now everybody's thinking about security. Security is involved in it. We've shifted everything to the left. And now this is how we get to DevSecOps. Now, as we begin to wrap up here, there's some fundamentals to also sort of think of when we go through this. And so, one, we're going to shift left. Security is part of development. It is not separate. If you remember early on, it was kind of this, here's dev, and then it was like this separate team, and then we deployed. And then it created a bottleneck. We're not doing that anymore. We're shifting left. We have greater throughput, easier to respond, less time to respond. So we're shifting left. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have improved proactive security. We're going to identify and fix security issues during development. And that's really, really important because now exposing developers, telling them about security issues that have been found sooner so that they can be addressed while they're writing code. Right then and there, just like a defect. It's really, the thought is the same exact thing. From an infrastructure side, we want accelerated patching, and this also applies to software updates, both OS level or other infrastructure levels, but also even to the code. So we want to have vulnerability and patching as part of a release cycle. So you have it automated, you have it planned, but you have those times when you can just do it when it's needed because something came up, right? We want to be able to accelerate that time and understand the impact and plan for it and communicate it. And what a big part of this is automation. Now, there's lots of tools and platforms out there. There's lots of ways to do it. We won't go into any specific tools. Definitely reach out and talk to us because we have experience with a lot of that. But everybody's different in what their needs are, and that's a tool is there to help. But there's other fundamental things that need to be in place too, and also understanding and planning around how to leverage a tool or tools or platforms. But again, we're going to be building automated security into the modern development and release cycle. That's really, really important. We're going to be building automated security into the modern development and release cycle. By doing so, it's no longer separate. It's part of the overall process. And we really want to make sure that you have a repeatable adaptive process. So in other words, You're going to apply security consistently and at scale. And that's the most important part. When it's done consistently and you've got automation, now it can be done at scale. And that's, again, that's critically important. It's just like with DevOps or other sorts of things. For instance, if you've got infrastructure as code, configuration as code, put some foundational things in, you get better and you get better. And now all of a sudden it starts to grow, and now things are being done at scale. And that's really, really important, because when you get to that point where you can do things at scale, that's where you really start to maximize the returns of reducing risk, reducing technical debt, and being able to, again, address and respond to customer needs and market changes. Now, we've talked about those fundamentals, but those are kind of things you do. What's our thought process? What's our, if you will, our manifesto? And this is important, because this, what I'm about to list here, this really helps guide a lot of other things, planning, building that strategy, even down to implementation. And when you're doing it, everybody should be kind of thinking through these things consistently to say, hey, does this help? Does this lead to our manifesto? That's that North Star, if you will. So build security in, don't bolt it on. You want to increase relying on empowered development teams over security specialists. That's not only empowering developers, but also having those security specialists, you need them, being part of the development process, not after the development process. That goes to the first point, don't bolt it on. So this is actually about sharing the knowledge and spreading the knowledge of security to everybody, and also building a bigger team of cross disciplines of security and development and operations and everything. Now, this one is one of my favorites. We want to increase the implementation of implementing features securely over just putting in security features. Why? Security features are great, but if you start to put in a lot of security features, you actually will slow things down and can drag things on, make things more complicated, instead of just having features implemented securely. Not only with that, going back to scale, if you just have security features, let's say, those are extra things that have to be maintained and dealt with, and that's harder to scale. But when things are implemented securely, now you've, again, empowered developers. They're working with security specialists that are part of the team. They're getting that feedback. It's really and truly about embedding security into the fabric, the DNA of an application or a service or what have you. And that's one that's really, really important. The other thing is invest and use tools as feedback for learning, as opposed to end of phase stage gates. What do we mean by that? Well, you get SAST, you get DAST, you get IS, there's lots of other scanning, software composition, things like that. You want to do those things early. You want to scan and report back, and there's all sorts of things you can do there to alert people to know to address those things, to remediate those issues, and learn from those things. Why do we keep seeing this thing, let's say this one vulnerability or over and over again? Okay, well, let's educate everybody on a new way to let's say, architect and design this piece of software. Again, implementing something securely as opposed to a security feature. And a lot of times what we see with customers is, quote unquote, security will be, okay, yes, a security scan was done and somebody hits an approval button or sends an email or something, and now it goes to the next stage, which might be deployment to an environment, right? There's no necessarily any learning there. It's just somebody performed functions and said yes or no. Now, those don't go away. Those are still important, especially auditing in approvals, things like that. But again, let's look at using platforms to learn and understand and give feedback around security and the security posture of things, so that people, again, are made aware of it early on, can plan and mitigate and resolve those issues. And then we want to build on culture change more than just policy enforcement. Right? Again, this is about, yes, you need to have policies and everything. And instead of just saying, well, it needs to meet this policy, which it does need to meet that policy, it needs to be, hey, how do we really think about and have this policy throughout? Now, a little caveat there is policies can change. You don't necessarily have to be ripping code apart because policies change, but there are ways to decouple and smart ways to do things. But again, it's just thinking through that and saying, hey, let's not just think about enforcing policy. Let's really think about on a culture of change. So these 5 things are really, really critical to implementing DevSecOps, okay, and thinking through that. Now we'll get into that more in part 2 and part 3, as I mentioned. But again, this is our guiding light. These are the things that are going to continue to take us forward when we think about DevSecOps. Now, to start to really wrap up, what should our new SDLC look like? In a nutshell, we want to shift security left. We want to integrate seamlessly for development. That integrates security seamlessly for development. Let developers know sooner about security issues. They can be looked at, they can be discussed, and then they can be resolved early on. Right? The longer we wait, the more expensive it gets. It slows things down, and it increases risk and exposure. Now what we're doing is we're getting dev, we're getting sec or security, and ops on the same page at the same time. Everybody is involved because all these teams are a part of an application living and breathing from idea all the way until the time it finally gets decommissioned. The infrastructure it runs on, networking, storage, everything. Everybody's now involved. Compliance and auditing are done sooner, which is important. Usually every company has some level of that, but again, each company has to use the information and determine what does compliance and auditing mean. You might have different, for lack of a better term, compliance and regulations you have to adhere to, but now it's being done sooner as opposed to at the end, and it's actually being done more often and it's continuous. And that's important. Always getting, really you're cataloging and understanding the current state of anything at any one time to be able to make plans to address. And that's just an iterative process that's over and over again. And it starts to get into being proactive in planning so that you reduce the severity and the times and potential of having to be reactive because something came up. Those are going to happen, but now you're much more prepared. And then automate, automate, automate. That is critically important because, again, that's about having to do these things at scale. So I want to say thank you all for joining. I hope you learned some things if you're new to DevSecOps, or maybe you're not new to it but wanted to learn some more. Again, this is part 1 of our series. Part 2 and 3 will be coming up, and that's where we will talk into the why, that's part 2, and then the how, which is part 3. So we look forward to seeing you next time, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, would like to learn more. And also you can find more information at our website. It's axcelino.io, our website, or you can visit us on social media. We're on all social platforms, but the best place to find us is going to be on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and we are just under our company name. So again, thank you everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next time.